the largest land mammal was almost wiped out by hunting and deforestation. Its recovery is now being regarded as a conservation success story. Take a look. In the remote mountains of southern Romania, the forest was dying after centuries of logging, farming, and hunting had stripped the land bare. Wildlife vanished. Meadows collapsed. And what was once a thriving ecosystem had become a silent wasteland. Then, in 2014, conservationists made a bold and risky move. They released a herd of European bison, animals that hadn't lived there in over 200 years. In 2009, the population of bison in the park consisted of only 11 members. It has since grown to 33. Many believed it would fail. The bison were huge, destructive grazers. The terrain was unforgiving. Even scientists doubted it would work. But the plan went ahead anyway. Just 1 year later, something happened that no one saw coming. What unfolded next changed the way people saw rewilding forever. Long before cities spread across the continent, the European bison, also known as wisent, roamed freely from the forests of France to the mountains of the Caucasus. These massive herbivores once played a crucial ecological role in Europe's landscapes, grazing across woodlands and meadows, dispersing seeds, and shaping the environment through their constant movement. But their dominance would not last. The decline of the European bison did not happen suddenly. It unfolded slowly, almost invisibly over centuries, as human civilization expanded and reshaped the natural world in ways that left no room for giants. By the Middle Ages, the steady spread of agriculture had already pushed bison into isolated pockets of wilderness. As forests were cleared for farmland and settlements, the bison lost the vast territories they needed to migrate, forage, and reproduce. Deforestation was not just a local issue, it was a continental transformation that fragmented ecosystems and left many large species without viable habitat. Yet the bison held on, adapting to shrinking ranges and relying on protected forests that had not yet been reached by the axe. The Industrial Revolution brought more than just steam engines and steel, it brought firearms, tools that gave humans an overwhelming advantage in the field. Where once hunting bison required skill and coordination, it now only required pulling a trigger. As rifles spread across Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries, the bison population declined further. They were hunted not only for meat and hides, but also as status symbols and trophies by nobles and military officers. The last strongholds of the species became dangerously vulnerable. The most devastating blow came during World War I. As European empires collided, the natural world suffered along with human civilization. The Białowieża forest in Poland, home to the last significant wild population of bison, became a battleground and a source of resources for occupying forces. German troops, driven by hunger and opportunism, killed off nearly every bison in the forest. By the war's end, only 9 remained. They too would disappear in the chaos that followed. By 1927, the unthinkable had happened. The European bison was extinct in the wild. Only 54 individuals survived, all of them in captivity. In the silence left behind, a question began to form: could these remaining bison, descendants of a vanished wilderness, be used to bring that wilderness back? After the last European bison in the wild was killed in 1927, the species came dangerously close to total extinction. The only bison left were those living in captivity, mostly in zoos and a few private reserves. In total, 54 individuals remained, and among them, only 12 had the genetic strength needed to rebuild the population. These animals had been removed from their natural environment, and no one knew whether they could ever return. Still, scientists believed that saving the species, even in such a fragile state, was worth trying. In the early 1930s, conservationists began carefully organizing breeding programs. These were launched in countries like Poland, Germany, and Russia. Because the remaining bison were so few, every birth mattered, and every animal had to be closely tracked. Breeders kept detailed records to avoid inbreeding and make sure the animals stayed as healthy as possible. This type of careful genetic planning was one of the first of its kind in Europe, and it laid the groundwork for modern species recovery programs. In 1932, a major step forward came with the creation of the International Society for the Protection of the European Bison. This group brought together scientists, veterinarians, and conservationists from across borders. Despite the political divisions in Europe at the time, especially during and after World War II, the effort to save the bison continued. The focus was simple but critical: protect the animals, grow their numbers, and preserve as much genetic diversity as possible. By the 1960s and 1970s, the captive population had increased steadily. Bison were being kept in large enclosures, forest parks, and protected areas. But as the population grew, so did a more ambitious question: could these bison ever go back to the wild? And if so, what would that mean for the damaged ecosystems across Europe? This question became more important as scientists started learning about the deep connection between bison and the health of the land. European bison are more than just large animals, they are what ecologists call a keystone species. That means their behavior helps shape the entire environment around them. As they move, bison graze on shrubs and grass, clear pathways through overgrowth, spread seeds in their fur and dung, and enrich the soil with natural fertilizer. Their actions support many other plants and animals, from insects and birds to small mammals and wildflowers. Without bison, many parts of Europe's forests and meadows began to decline. Overgrowth choked out sunlight. Wildflowers disappeared. Insects and pollinators lost their habitats. The land became quiet and still, no longer the dynamic living system it once was. That's when a new idea took hold. Instead of keeping bison in cages, what if they were brought back to help restore the wild? That idea would become the foundation of rewilding. The bison's role was no longer just about survival, it was about healing the land itself. For decades, scientists worked to protect the European bison in captivity. But by the early 2000s, it became clear that simply keeping them alive behind fences was not enough. The next step was rewilding, returning these animals to the places they had disappeared from, and letting them live freely once again. It was a bold idea. Rewilding would not only test whether the bison could survive in the wild, but also whether they could help restore the damaged landscapes of Europe. No country took this gamble more seriously than Romania. At the heart of this plan was a remote and rugged area called the Arcu Mountains, part of the southern Carpathians in western Romania. This region had once been home to wild bison, but for over 200 years, none had walked its slopes. Though rich in biodiversity, the area had been deeply scarred by human activity. Overgrazing by livestock, illegal logging, and the collapse of traditional farming had left behind vast stretches of degraded land. Meadows had become overgrown, forests had lost their natural balance, and native species were in decline. In many ways, it had become what conservationists called a wilderness desert, a place that looked wild but no longer functioned as a healthy ecosystem. Locals even referred to it as the dying forest. Rewilding Europe, a non-profit organization focused on restoring nature across the continent, partnered with WWF Romania to do something no one had ever attempted at this scale. They chose the Arcu Mountains as the site for the largest wild bison reintroduction project in Europe. The goal was not only to bring back the bison, but to use them as a tool to heal the land. If successful, it would be a living example of how rewilding could repair the ecological damage caused by centuries of human interference. Conservationists knew this in theory, but few believed the scale of change would be visible so quickly. Skeptics were still voicing doubts. Could a herd of a few dozen animals really alter a whole biome? Could their presence do more good than harm? The answer began to reveal itself in the soil. Camera traps and drone surveys picked up subtle shifts. First, small clearings started appearing where thick underbrush had once choked light from reaching the ground. Bison movements created open patches that allowed wildflowers, herbs, and native grasses to re-emerge. Their hooves broke up compacted earth, letting air and water nourish deeper root systems. And when bison rolled or wallowed, they unintentionally prepared the perfect seed beds, sometimes spreading the seeds directly from their own fur or dung. Soon, researchers recorded a noticeable rise in wild plant diversity. Botanists documented species in areas once dominated by monoculture grass or invasive brush. Ground-nesting birds such as the Eurasian woodlark and tawny pipit returned to breed in the newly opened meadows. Insects followed, especially pollinators drawn by the increasing floral richness. Foxes, hares, and smaller mammals reappeared to forage in the bison-created patches. And with the return of prey came larger predators. Sightings of wolves and lynx grew more common. Ecologists analyzing the soil found improved structure, higher organic content, and stronger carbon retention. Water runoff slowed. Erosion decreased. Even local weather patterns in some valleys subtly stabilized due to new vegetation cover.